Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Hey gang, Red Hills Rancher here, back with another weekly episode of Ranching Reboot, where we're shifting paradigms and changing minds and talking about all kinds of new things going on in the world of agriculture. With me, as always, is my navigator on this crazy mission, my co-pilot, CK.
Hey Brian, thank you so much. So we have today Rowdy Yeatts from High Plains Biochar. Rowdy, how are you?
I'm doing excellent here in lovely Laramie, Wyoming. It's trying to be spring up here, mixed with a little snow occasionally still.
Still snowing. I think that's wild.
Yeah, believe it or not, last year our last hard freeze day was June 8th.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it sounds like that's what you're used to then.
Somewhat. That was a little bit of a bizarre, whatever that polar vortex or thing that came down that time. But yeah, we do have a very short growing season around here, that's for sure.
Yeah. So we're talking about biochar today, and I really wanted to get into the basics first for me, who I know nothing about it, and maybe our listeners who some of them may not know as much. Can you start with the basics and what it is and maybe the intended use?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in really simple terms, biochar is charcoal. Most of you may have made it in the past without realizing it. If you've had a campfire and noticed the next morning that there were some black chunks of carbon left in the bottom, that's biochar. You know, if you have a fireplace, you may have noticed when you clean out the ashes that occasionally there are some black chunks of charcoal in there. You know, that's biochar. So in simple terms, it's just charcoal. We do make it, in different methods, sometimes at different temperatures and under much more controlled situations with automated equipment, which makes it a little bit different. But you can use even the ancient Amazonians are kind of the ones that got this all started thousands of years ago. They were having to feed these large civilizations, and they didn't have any of this fancy farm equipment that we have now. So what they decided to do was improve the soil. So they started adding composting, adding manure, adding this charcoal to their really sandy soils down there, and they turned out to make them really fertile. And that's kind of how this was rediscovered, as our scientists ran across these soils recently and, started researching and saying, what have they done to make this soil so different than the surrounding soils? And that's one of the things that they found. They refer to it as terra preta, if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I've heard people say you can't use like treated charcoal though. For a barbecue, they're like, probably not, because it's treated with different chemicals and stuff. Is that right?
It kind of depends. I guess they may have been referring to using treated wood to make the biochar.
Okay.
They may have also been referring to like having lighter fluid in the fire pit.
I was like, I could just add it to my compost pile that I have in my backyard.
I don't know about what you guys have there in Kansas. I know in most parts of the western parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, we have high pH soils, so the ash isn't necessarily good. But other parts of the country where they do have a low pH, so they can add the ashes as well. But anyhow, so the main use for biochar is using as a soil amendment. I think that we see it a lot in like the greenhouse industry. Specialty agriculture was kind of who adopted this first. You're slowly starting to see it move into other aspects of agriculture. Using it as a powdered biochar as a seed coating is definitely one of the uses that we're starting to see more in mainstream agriculture. Feeding biochar to livestock is starting more popular.
That's what you're doing, right? You're feeding it are you feeding it to them? Yeah.
Yeah. I mix it with, first, Rowdy sent me some tubs last year. There were molasses, I think around 4 or 5% protein. And it was just an attractant to get them to eat it. And they started eating it. Then I started mixing it with mineral, and then just leaving it out loose. And they kind of generally consume it in all forms. And once they get to a point where they balance out, consumption just kind of almost drops off.
Perfect. But as far as different uses go, biochar is one of those things that it has a lot of different uses. I mean, people are using it for water filtration application. They're trying to pull phosphorus and nitrogen out of like our lakes and ponds where you're seeing these algae blooms that are taking place. We've done some research capturing mercury out of flue gas at coal-fired power plants. So There's a lot of other really interesting uses for biochar beyond just a soil amendment and feeding it.
So but we're primarily interested in, of course, the agriculture, the soil benefits to biochar, whether we're, spreading it on, incorporating it into the soil, or whether we're using it as a livestock additive. So what are some of the good benefits? Like, why do you want to put biochar in your soil, Rowdy?
I think simple terms, adding soil carbon, you're going to hold more moisture. So you're going to keep moisture available to those roots for longer periods of time. It gets really into, cation exchange capacities and the exchange of ions between the roots, and that relationship between the biochar and the roots is really interesting. The ability to hold the nutrients is another pretty big one. We don't necessarily get a lot of rain out here where we're at, but where you guys do, you get a lot more moisture. So you may run into issues where you're seeing fertilizers washed out of fields. The biochar can be really good at holding on to that fertilizer and then just releasing it back to the roots as they need it.
So it's kind of like an underground warehouse for nutrients.
Yeah, an underground sponge, an underground warehouse. It's kind of like an apartment complex for microbes and fungi and protozoa and all these other living organisms that are in there. They like getting up inside that carbon structure.
Can you talk a little bit about why that's important?
Absolutely. The life, if you have the housing available, then the life really starts to move in and multiply. So anytime that life, I don't know, it seems like the more and more we're learning is that our farmers are actually more microbe ranchers than they are farmers in many ways, where they're ranching their microbes, and the microbes are in turn giving them the soil health to produce the crop. So I kind of like to look at it that way.
Didn't Gabe Brown say something like that?
I'm not sure if Gabe did or not. You start thinking about it, and it's like, it's really true. You're kind of a micro brancher if you're a good farmer.
Like, dung beetles are employee of the month now for about 4 years running.
Yeah,
absolutely. We see a lot of guys that are starting to feed biochar that are also getting into dung beetles, and that's one of kind of the neat aspects that we hadn't really even focused on, and nobody's done research on this yet. But we're pretty sure that feeding the biochar reduces the pat toxicity. There's Dr. Goosey Hayes from up at Montana State. He's kind of a dung beetle specialist, and we've had some discussions about this, how if you're trying to get your animals off the wormers and detoxify those pats so that they're more appealing to the dung beetles and they're not going to kill the dung beetles, that this is another interesting aspect. But yeah, once those dung beetles start burying the manure and the biochar, that's when things get really exciting for the soil.
So I dodged this earlier when you asked me if I'd been feeding biochar to my cows. So for the last 45 days or so, I've had biochar mixed with the mineral, incorporated some 42-way milpa seed that I got from Green Cover. So the theory is we've got seeds, biochar going through the rumen, and they're going to be incorporated perfectly encapsulated in fertilizer. So
brilliant.
I love this. A natural manure seed coating.
Everything's experimental. I think I've used about 10 or 15 pounds of seed total in this operation, and I know the areas where we've done it. So it'll be interesting to watch as the summer comes to kind of travel those areas and see if I have just random squash and popcorn and turnips out in the pasture.
Yeah, that's going to be really neat. Really neat. I'm excited to see the results of that. I know the video. I had quite a few people on the Facebook page. They were kind of like, "What is this guy doing exactly?" But I've seen that similar using cattle and their manure to seed areas in like national forests where they have burn areas. I've seen that done before. I'm not exactly sure how successful it was, but I know that some similar thoughts have been system that it seems perfectly plausible.
So what are some of the things that biochar does to the rumen besides remove toxicity?
This is one of the things that we're really interested in and learning more about. There just hasn't been a whole lot of research done on this so far. The research that we've done with the University of Nebraska, their focus is really on trying to reduce methane. So that's really what they're monitoring. They have these special head boxes where they are monitoring 23 hours a day what's coming out of the animal's mouth, and then they have entire barns where they can actually monitor the entire herd and see what kind of methane reductions they're getting or not getting. But so to answer your question, we're not exactly sure. We know that there's something to it. We know that the amount of biochar that we're feeding the animals isn't enough to actually absorb the methane, because we're just talking about very small amounts. So there's another mechanism at work there. And, there's smart people like Dr. Andrea Watson there at the University of Nebraska that they're going to be doing their third bee trial this summer, kind of trying to understand this. But again, I think we need to get more focus on some of these other aspects, like you said, looking at the changes in the rumen fluid and not so much just the methane, because there's a lot more to it than just the methane, I think.
Well, there's the methane, and then, down that whole rabbit trail would be all the microbes that live in the rumen, that do the hard work, that actually feed the animal, and unlocking how those all function together. I think we're just on the edge of starting to fall down there and really go down that rabbit hole.
No, absolutely. I think we're on the right path there. I think it's kind of the same story with dung beetles. It's like we've barely scratched the surface. Like, I was shocked talking to some of the researchers. We still don't even really know what dung beetles exist in each state. It's mind-boggling how we haven't done some, but it's also exciting that we do have people that are starting to kind of open some of these closed doors and find out what's going on.
How did you get involved with biochar? Tell us more about your story, Rowdy.
I got involved with biochar. I lived over in Chadron, Nebraska, and believe it or not, Nebraska actually has some national forests. People, the western part of the states, it's kind of like Kansas. Right. It has two different sides, but the western part of the state, it's different. So there's a lot of wood there I was seeing that was just getting piled up, pine getting piled up and just burned during the winter. And I just thought, wow, there's got to be a better use for it than this. And when I kind of first heard about biochar, I was, the light bulb kind of went off for me, and it was like, oh, wow, this is kind of my way to make a difference. I'm kind of a pyromaniac of sorts, so I like playing with fire, and I was one of those kind of guys that enjoyed fire and that aspect of it. So I think that was really more of a wood utilization side, I would say, more than anything, was kind of what got me interested in biochar. And I was able to get hooked up with the Nebraska Forest Service. So the Kansas Forest Service is part of this too. We started the Great Plains Biochar Initiative. So it was those two forest services and us got some USDA funding to do some education on biochar in the Kansas and Nebraska region. So you guys, I don't know if you ever crossed paths with any of the workshops that took place. I know that they did several down in Kansas, one in Chadron, Nebraska, and I think a couple in the eastern part of the state of Nebraska. But that's kind of what got me started, I guess, with down the biochar wormhole.
Well, great. So tell us about High Plains Biochar and how you guys kind of started and where you're at now.
Yeah, we started out, like I said, in Chadron, Nebraska. We kind of focused on wood utilization. We were looking at using post-peeling waste, where they make fence posts there, where they peel fence posts out of the pine. And so they make a lot of waste wood doing that. So we kind of started out, like a lot of biochar enthusiasts do, with 55-gallon drums and stovepipe and whatever other scrap metal you could find laying around and watching.
It's like moonshining.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. There's endless amounts of YouTube videos of people that that have done different, tried different contraptions and things. One neat thing that I kind of had an advantage on that was I have a fabrication background. So when you can weld and do some of these other things, it gives you a little bit of an advantage when you start tinkering with homemade biochar equipment and that sort of thing. So once I got the biochar bug, I started kind of building homemade biochar contraptions, but I eventually went ahead and purchased a commercial biochar producing equipment in 2017 and started producing biochar there in Chadron. We started doing different research projects through kind of their wood utilization programs.
Hey, so how is biochar made? You mentioned you have a big commercial process machine. So
Absolutely.
So walk us through how it's made kind of with your process, and maybe you can also talk about what an on-farm process would look like.
Yeah, basically when you're making biochar, you're cooking wood chips in simple terms. You're cooking these things, it's called pyrolysis, so you're cooking them in the absence of oxygen. So you're basically heating things up to between 1,000 and 1,500 degrees, kind of depending on the type of biochar that you're making. And in the absence of oxygen, and we're burning off all the wood gas and all the other volatiles, and what you're left with is almost pure carbon. So this equipment here, like I have one set up here at High Plains Biochar, where we heat a shop building and we heat a house that's on site here and heat a greenhouse. So we take this wood waste, we run it through a hammer mill first to get it uniform. Sometimes when our wood chips come in, there's a lot of odd sized pieces in there, so I like to run it through a hammer mill to get it where it'll run through augers and grain handling type equipment. So basically it gets fed in, cooked at this set temperature that we desire. We absorb the heat. We use a liquid heat exchanger here, so we can pipe the heated water wherever we need it. And then the other stream that you come out with there is your biochar. So, and it produces somewhere between about 1/3 and 1/2 by volume. So if you are going to run a cubic yard of wood chips in a day, you'll get about 1/2 cubic yard of biochar, somewhere around there.
And it loses a lot of weight too.
Absolutely, yeah. Once you get rid of all the moistures and the turpentines, and a lot of when you're down to just the carbon, there's definitely not a lot of weight there to it. It's really interesting how the biochar can absorb moisture while it's sitting in bags. If you get a rainy week and have a real high humidity, that bag of biochar can gain even 50 or 100 pounds just sitting there. It's quite amazing how good that stuff is at holding moisture.
I figured out real fast you can't shovel it into a mineral tub and then put it in the back of your side-by-side and go down the road at 40 miles an hour and expect any of it to be there when you get to the pasture. So I learned that you need to wet that stuff down to hold it down so it'll stay in the tub. And the cows, they don't mind if it's wet, soggy, or what?
No, we have a lot of guys that do that. They just add moisture to it. That seems to work really well. There is this one specific feeder that I think I've actually sent to you, but because your animals have horns, it's an issue for them. But there is one that works really well in the wind if you don't want to have to pre-treat anything, because the wind out here in Wyoming, it is horrendous. So you definitely need to weigh it down. I think what would work really well is like absorbing the salt into the biochar first, because the salt or the mineral or something, it would absorb it really well, and it would also give it some weight.
Like, I haven't really mixed, like when I mix it, I don't wet the biochar down. I kind of layer it in there. And then when I get out to the pasture, I mix it up. And I'm sure we lose some to the wind, but I didn't think it would be that great of an idea to get my mineral package wet with the biochar. I thought that just might make some weirdness, but I can see where maybe wetting the biochar down and then throwing the salt and mineral in and stirring it up might be a better deal.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of different ways to go about exactly how to blend that. We keep trying to figure out, it's kind of like with the seed coating. It's like, how's this really going to work out? And, as far as like applying biochar out to a field, that's a whole nother step, and it gets complicated where if you can just apply it as a seed coating, it's not. And I think we're trying to figure out the same thing with the free range cattle. Like, what's just the easiest way to do this that doesn't require extra work, extra steps? And I think that with you guys testing this out and kind of trying different things, that's what we're kind of hoping to find out, is to see kind of what works and what doesn't.
So I think it's kind of a good time to seg you into a question we got from the Ranching Reboot Paddock from Michael Kinsey. And he wants to know, how viable of a tool is biochar for soil regeneration from a cost versus gain standpoint? And I'm not sure what he means when he says gain, whether he's talking about pounds gained or carbon gain in the soil. So what do you have that could address that?
I think that's a great question, because it always comes down to economics. And as far as what I've observed in the industry is, there's not a lot of farmers who are just going to go buy a bunch of biochar. It's still pretty expensive to just go buy it. And that's where I really feel like that the on-farm biochar production is really the direction that we're going to go, where a lot of these guys, they have some either wood waste, at least in this area, a lot of them have wood waste available nearby or on their ranch or farm, or they have some other type of crop residue, a hemp residue, a corn residue, oat hulls, something that is not being used that they could burn and turn into biochar. And I think that's where the real opportunity is for these guys to clean up a mess, utilize some heat a greenhouse, heat a shop building, and create this stream of biochar that they can feed, they can add to their soil. And then we're going to kind of take that one step further for the guys that are really serious about this and want to produce some quantities of biochar and actually market those carbon credits for the biochar that's being produced.
So you're saying that there's a market for taking invasive trees, turning them into biochar, getting the heat out, and then using the biochar to improve our soil carbon?
Absolutely.
What a novel concept. That could maybe save the Great Plains.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you go from region to region, because everybody has their own issues. Like here we have these massive forest fires in these huge lodgepole pine forests, where in other areas you might have invasive cedars that just drive you nuts. And other areas may have massive cottonwood river bottoms where that's their source of wood waste. So everybody kind of has their own source, but it seems like wherever you go, there's some sort of wood waste or other type of crop residue that could be utilized to make biochar.
And that's a great lead in for our next paddock question from Jeremiah Eubank. And he wants to know about portable biochar units for on-ranch production from local materials such as cleared brush. What does that look like? Does that look like more of a mobile unit that travels around from farm to farm, or is that something that eventually most farmers and ranchers are going to want to have to deal with their own woody waste residue and generate their own source of biochar?
This is really an interesting one. And when I started out, in fact, that first machine I bought, it was a 1 million BTU unit on a 20-foot gooseneck trailer. And I was convinced that was going to be the way to do it, was to travel around. And I quickly realized that it just adds a lot of different complexities trying to run that style of equipment. There are other kinds of equipment, if you're familiar with air burners, that are for brush clearing, but they have added a kind of an auger system underneath so that you can actually produce some biochar with those. And those can be a good option for some applications. Kind of the challenge there is that the biochar that you produce is really big and chunky, and you don't have a lot of control over the temperature. So you can end up with pieces that may have unburned parts in the middle, and the biochar is big, so you still kind of need to break it down before it's usable. You can't run it through any kind of an equipment. So there is equipment like that out there. Like I said, air burners are they make a small trailer and then a really large one that's like $500,000 that on tracks for driving up. They use them a lot here, like in the forests for clearing material, but they were really intended just to burn things down to ash really fast. And so they will make biochar, but it's not a perfect science, I guess, going that route. It seems like what always ends up happening is that you come back to going from the portable idea to having a unit where you can actually utilize the heat for some other purpose, and have that doing that mobile just makes things really complicated. And that's kind of the direction we're going. We feel like that I've been doing this for a while and ran across plenty of farms and ranches where they have these materials available and they want to try biochar. And I think that's kind of the opportunity there. where they're not necessarily going to go out and buy a semi-load of biochar just to try out. But if they could make it on their own farm, then they would.
So without a lot of fancy equipment, how could one make biochar at home or on their own?
You can make biochar at home with nothing more than just a hose. You can make a pile of brush. I've done this many times. And a nice dry pile of brush, you light it at the top, which is really, it doesn't make sense because we're used to thinking, oh, we light it on the bottom, but actually light it on the top and it won't smoke really as much. And as that burns down through there, it will convert a lot of that material into biochar. And then you just have to stop the process at the very end with like a garden hose before it turns to ash. But anybody can make some biochar at home with no special tools. It's just the reality is that biochar is kind of chunky and it's not perfect, but there's also no investment there. So that's what I do with my waste here on site. If I don't have a chipper handy to use, I'll just pile it up and do that myself, and then I just throw it in my compost piles. I think that's how a lot of people get started, is just making a little biochar at home. You can try it out that way. It's super simple. The challenge here is, in this part of the world, you can't burn outside very often just because like fire danger like 10 months out of the year now. And
or Californians.
You have to
thinking like, oh, they should definitely do that to manage the forests in California. I'm like, oh no, they probably won't because of air quality issues or something like that.
No, biochar is really big out in California. They have state support for biochar. They've approved it as a feed supplement at the state level as well. And they fund a lot of biochar and wood utilization projects. So they really have gotten on board. They also, there's one biochar producer. It's the first biochar producer in the United States that's sold carbon credits out there, Pacific Biochar. So they're definitely kind of ahead of the game as far as biochar goes out there. But they do have their own other challenges, we'll say.
So I guess a question I'm going to just ask it because I was like, do I ask this or not? So we're working with carbon ranches or storing carbon, and one thing someone has asked is there a way to cheat the system when you're doing like measurements? Is it just like applying biochar everywhere and manipulating their land that way to get better results? And I wonder what you thought about that, because I've heard that a few times, people who are like sign carbon contracts and selling their carbon as far as a way to kind of game the system, because if they're measuring actual soil carbon accrual, is biochar that way to beat the system, or do you think that the something else?
Oh, I mean, biochar will definitely increase your soil carbon. It's
but it's true, right? It's truly increasing the carbon, right? Or is
the cost benefit ratio going to be there? I guess is the question. Is the cost of the biochar plus application going to be worth the cost of the credit?
The credit is more like a bonus. I guess I'll put it that way. What we're seeing so far on the carbon credit market for biochar is between $100 and $150 per ton. Mm-hmm. So the biochar is a premium carbon credit. What you saw, like when Microsoft bought carbon credits this time around, more than half of them didn't pass their smell test. Essentially, right. They were questioning the methodology, and that's really the neat thing about biochar is you can see it, you can weigh it, you can test it. It's not pointing out at a field and saying, "See all that carbon we stored with those crops," and so it's a little bit different in that sense. So you actually get a 3-to-1 multiplier on that. So for 1 ton of biochar, you get 3 tons of carbon credit.
That's drawn down, right? Drawn down from the root system, it's not from the actual biochar in the soil.
The biochar in the soil contributes to that as well.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, as far as the double counting and stuff, I mean, I'm not exactly sure. I don't follow exactly what like Indigo Ag is doing with the.
It's really new. It's new, right? So there's not a lot of
And by the time we release this in 3 weeks, it'll be probably completely different anyway.
Yeah. Absolutely. The way we're going to focus on this is we're going to document and verify the biochar production that through our equipment, through our remote monitoring system. So we're going to be able to confirm how much that equipment ran with the customer to really provide the buyer of those carbon credits some ease of mind. And so we're also going to be bringing in a third party to verify those carbon credits. So it's really about being transparent. But you're right. There are always going to be people that try to buck the system, I'm sure. But
yeah. And I'm not really worried about that because you're just going to have, shoplifters at grocery stores all the time, right? So it's like that's something that happens. And I really don't think ranchers really do that kind of stuff. I mean, there's definitely outliers, but I don't want it to negate the quality of the credit. Do you know what I'm saying? Is like I've seen some press lately, and they're like, this is not even a credit. Like this should not even be called a credit because X, Y, and Z, and they think it's just smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, biochar normally, from the things that I've seen, biochar doesn't really fall into those categories just because it's very different. You're seeing a lot. I know the last article I read was about planting mangroves, and a couple of the scientists were kind of coming out and saying, I'm not so sure that this is really what you're saying it is. And that's kind of the neat thing about the biochar. You can even do the testing on it where it only degrades about 0.3% over 100 years. So basically what they're doing in Europe is that you sequester like 2,050 pounds or whatever the math is to where it's a 100-year carbon credit with the biochar as well, where these other carbon credits, they can't guarantee that because that tree could die next year or get cut down, and within a few years it's released all its carbon back to the atmosphere. So that's kind of one of the neat things, that this biochar will still be in the soil thousands of years from now. I mean, that's what our scientists are finding down from the Amazonians. They're still testing biochar that was applied 3,000 years ago, which is just fascinating. But once you get that biochar, that carbon hot like that, it really turns it into a stable form of carbon where it doesn't go away. And that's why biochar is getting more and more accepted as a climate mitigation strategy.
So we've talked a little bit about soil testing and results. Do you have any soil carbon test results that you'd like to share with us?
Specifically, normally what most of the testing, believe it or not, most of the testing you see done with biochar is about yield. Is not necessarily about measuring the changes in soil carbon. We're still kind of, I would say, behind on that in the United States. As far as that goes, there have been a couple of long-term studies out of Australia that got into the soil carbon and how adding biochar accelerated the soil carbon growth. But we haven't necessarily seen that in the United States. So I would like to see more of these long-term tests done so that we kind of know, because I think that's with a lot of the things that these regenerative agriculture folks are doing. They're not 2-year benefits or 1-year benefits. They're 20, 30, 50, 100-year type benefits. So you really need to be thinking long-term with how that works. And part of that is doing the testing long-term so that we do know exactly how that works. But I definitely think that's, kind of the challenge is just catching up here in the United States. I was blown away the other day. I was reading an article, and I guess a lot of the pellet production in the Southeast United States actually gets shipped over to Europe because they do a lot of their power generation with pellets. So some of the stuff you just kind of have to shake your head. I'm sure that we'll probably be doing that in 5 or 10 years. We'll start seeing our coal power plants converted over into biomass and some of these other sources, and then making biochar while we're producing electricity will follow shortly, like it is over there. And so that's kind of the neat thing, is we can kind of look at what's going on in Europe to get an idea of what works here. But as far as like changes in your soil, like feeding, I know the Doug Powell, that study, they've done quite a bit of soil testing at his place. One of the interesting things about him is he has a really low cost source of biochar available. So he feeds enormous amounts of biochar to his animals. It's mind boggling, but he's been able to really make some really drastic changes in his soil carbon over a fairly short period of time. But I wish I had some really good data to tell you on that, but unfortunately I do not.
Oftentimes anecdotes are just as truthful as hard research.
Well, it's funny though, because as soon as you said that, I thought, that's interesting, because almost every study I've ever seen on biochar, they're looking at like how much, what was the yield change in the crop that you were growing. Nobody really focused that much on what the changes in the soil health overall, which I guess that's kind of I guess that shows kind of maybe how we need to change our way of thinking a little bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you want, we can go down that rabbit trail of what biochar can do for crop yields.
Absolutely. I'm happy to talk about this. I mean, I think,
all the uses and benefits of biochar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of what I see going is that you can use biochar. It works out really well for the higher value crops like cannabis in Colorado. They use the heck out of biochar in that. But they're also, the amount of money that they're making on those crops is completely different than what a soybean farmer in Nebraska is getting. And that's kind of where what I am seeing is using biochar as a seed coating over a long period of time. It doesn't add any additional steps to the process. It doesn't add a significant cost to the process. You can get some really neat benefits with having the biochar right next to the seed. So that's kind of where I see the future going, is a seed that has some fertilizer and some biology at a seed coating with fertilizer and biology added to it, used in very small amounts over a long period of time to change soil health. What I don't really see being the case is people bringing in semi-loads of biochar per acre and just applying, $5,000 to $10,000 per acre worth of biochar on their crops. I don't see that being
right. Okay. Put those fears to bed then.
Well, yeah, it's just we have to be reasonable about so what works for a specialty, a farmer's market and a greenhouse operator down in Colorado. What works for them is much different than other situations. So I think trying to figure out what works for each person's operation, and that maybe feeding biochar for the ranch is a better situation for some people. And over time, you can certainly build soil health and increase your dung beetle population and increase your animal health and utilize some of the waste that you've got on your farm and that sort of thing.
I'm interested to see what it will do for our water systems too, since, everyone talks about all the nutrients that leach into their waterways, just retaining those, right? That was a big one.
I kind of think that's going to be a big one too. I mean, we've done a little bit of work with it. We've had one professor at the University of Nebraska that he didn't seem to share my vision in this, but I kind of envision using biochar wattles placed at the outlets and, specific areas on farms where they can capture some of those nutrients. And you're even starting to see some of those wattles, they're just taking them directly to the ponds and the lakes where there are all these algae blooms and things going on. Because the truth is that's fertilizer in there. And if you can capture that in the biochar and get it perfectly charged, that's a great way to charge that biochar before you apply it. And that's one of the things that you do have to kind of be careful with about biochar, is that it's a carbon sponge and it's really, really powerful. So you don't want to just apply a whole bunch of it to your soil, especially if there's not a lot of biology or life in that soil already, because it can starve those plants of things like nitrogen that first year, because it's really good at grabbing them. So if you can charge that biochar ahead of time, what we do a lot is just blend it with manure.
Hot chicken litter.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, yeah, that's the best. The chickens love it too. I have a little research farm here. So we have a small little herd of chickens, and we have a chicken tractor that we play around with. And we try a lot of different things that we preach around here, I guess. So one of my other ones is we grow in wood chips. So I just built a big bed out here. So I take a bunch of wood chips, a little bit of biochar and a little bit of manure and mix it all up. And we actually grow things in that. Our soil here in Laramie is just horrible, like a pH of about 8. There's almost no organic matter. Hardly anything will grow here. We get 8 inches of rain a year. It's just not good conditions. So I've gone to just growing in these raised wood chip beds, and it works out really well. The worms really love it. We always see worms the second year, and it just it seems to be a really interesting way to utilize a lot of the wood waste that we have around here as well.
Probably all kinds of interesting mycorrhizal fungi going on in there and eating the wood and transporting nutrients around and all kinds of good stuff.
There is, Brian. You wouldn't believe the amount of mushrooms that we get, and the variety of mushrooms. It's really fascinating, the amount of fungi life that you see in those wood chips. But no, you're absolutely right. But it's like finding a decaying tree out in the forest. There's always mushrooms and a lot of biology kind of going on in that soil around there.
Something tells me that the mushrooms break down the trees to feed the soil. I don't know, just kind of an idea that I'm getting.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the really interesting things when we do this in the beds is they shrink because they're composting all the time. So if like 2 years ago we grew corn, and by the end of the year the corn couldn't even hardly stand up because the wood chips had just been shrinking the entire summer around the roots. So the roots were exposed. It was actually pretty interesting, but that definitely shows you that there's a lot of activity going on when you can see that the pile's getting, maybe lost 6 inches over the summer.
We kind of experienced some similar things here with the gardens, little garden patches that we put in last year. So
yeah.
Let's circle back and talk about chickens and biochar. I haven't even heard of that one yet. So let's talk about your chickens and biochar. How do they eat it, and what differences?
Are they eating it?
Oh yeah. The chickens love it. They like it. They just eat it. We just throw it out on the ground and they'll go right for it. So it's not an issue for them. You're seeing it there. I think it soaks up the ammonia. I think there's some benefits there. I'm sure that it holds the nutrients in the manure and it does some other things, but that's another one of those that nobody has done a big research trial on feeding, biochar to poultry. And I think, as much as I hate to say it, that one of the biggest reasons is there's not a bunch of profit in it for any of these corporate ag companies. And so nobody's going to do that kind of research.
Not quite a magic bullet of soil health in a box you can sell at the farm store, right?
Right.
Exactly. But it's, it's something big. We're already seeing, I know there was a company in Colorado, they're adding biochar to the pelletized chicken litter fertilizer. So I think that combining the two can certainly be a great use. But, the chickens love it. You don't have to add anything to it. We just put it out free choice for them, and they will definitely go right for it.
That's wild. I'm going to have to bring a bucket home tomorrow for the chickens.
I was going to say, did we just open up another business, Brian?
I don't know. Maybe.
So I think that we're going to start seeing the biochar used a lot more on the animal side. And again, this isn't anything that we're creating here. This is just what we're seeing in Europe, what we're seeing in Australia, what we're already seeing in Canada. It's just
they lead the way. Yeah.
We're kind of just catching up in many ways.
So, if we've got to catch up, Jeff Goodwin wants to know, is biochar a scalable solution? How scalable is biochar?
That's another great question. I used to think that the way to do biochar was to build a giant plant and truck a whole bunch of wood into that plant. And I've kind of come full circle where I don't think that's the best way to go about this. I think that the best way to do biochar is on a local level. And like you say, that's a little bit of a challenge to scale that on a local level. And I kind of think that's where the co-op comes in, is I think that if we can combine multiple biochar producers, and then I think there are some benefits to kind of working as a group to either market the biochar, market the carbon credits associated. But I do think it's scalable. Like I said, what we're seeing in Europe, I think for us, we're going to start seeing a lot of our coal-fired power plants transitioned over to biomass, and then we'll start seeing those plants in turn figure out ways to make biochar while they're producing electricity. So I think that's going to be the big scale, the large scale applications that we see, like Oregon Biochar Solutions. They generate electricity in making biochar. So that's kind of the future I see on the large scale. I think we'll also see community scale. So like cities, municipalities that have urban wood waste, or after we have these huge wood storms like the city of Wichita, they just have a massive problem on their hands. So I think that we're going to see some pretty scaled up applications there with municipal wood waste and wood utilization programs. I think we can see some fairly scaled up applications at like sawmills, some of the bigger, like up in the Black Hills. I think we could see some pretty big ones there. And then a lot of these farms, some of these farms are big and have an enormous amount of waste and are looking for opportunities to improve their soil health. And I think that it's just going to take a few of these early adopters to kind of show everybody, kind of this another option, another way to go about utilizing their waste, generating some heat, having some biochar to feed or use for their soil, and then kind of getting in this carbon credit game that seems like it's going to be the future.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like the dairies, and how they have the lagoons, poop ponds, and I'm like, okay, we should put some biochar in there.
Yeah, that's really the best way. The dairies are the neat ones too, because for the feedlots and stuff, it takes a full cycle to really see the benefit. And when you feed biochar at a dairy, within a week, you start seeing the milk
Oh, really?
Absolutely. So we have a couple of dairies that feed it, and
sending all my dairy guys to you now, Rowdy.
It's really neat. We've actually got some composters, out in eastern Colorado and another one here in Wyoming that compost the dairy manure. So they're trying to convince those guys to start adding biochar, but a couple of those guys are actually going to be putting in units to start producing biochar and then adding it to their composting operation so that they sell to their organic farmers.
Okay. So what's the feedback when you talk to people? Do they think you're crazy if they know nothing about it, or do they usually already know about it before they talk to you?
It depends what state you're in.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, in Wyoming, Wyoming's kind of anti-biochar in many ways. But if you get around other places where people are a little bit more progressive and maybe have heard about cover crops or, no-till or, something like that, then
some of those things that don't work here, right?
Yeah. Woo! It's pretty, it's interesting kind of seeing how, the different approaches by state, but there's definitely areas where people have been exposed to it and they want to try biochar. They're interested in it. And they're just trying to figure out how to incorporate it into their operation in a way that makes financial sense. I think that's kind of the feedback I'm getting from people.
So where can we go on social media or on the internet to find you and get in touch with you and learn more about biochar?
We've got our website. It's hpbiochar.com. That's our website. We also have a Facebook page. If you just search for High Plains Biochar, you'll find us there. There's quite a few other, if you're really interested in biochar, there are some other Facebook groups that kind of focus on biochar, kind of like some of the Kansas, Nebraska soil stewardship health groups are. But so there's definitely some good resources out there for more information. But we will have our new biochar co-op website will be up probably within about a week. We're trying to get that launched. But those are the best ways to get a hold of us.
Well, great. Thanks. So who have been your biggest mentors in ag?
That's interesting. One of the first guys that I've worked quite a bit with is Larry Kundle. He ranches over here in Glendo, Wyoming. He was actually part of kind of our video that we did with that American Association for the Advancement of Science. They came out and filmed here back in 2019 for a week, and we went out to his ranch. And he's one of those kind of more progressive Wyoming producers, and he's really active in the state and kind of the agriculture community. And he really helped kind of get me started, and kind of helped bring me into the Wyoming agriculture community. But other guys, Del Fike has been another guy that I've kind of worked with over the years, and it's been fun to follow his path and kind of the direction that he's going. And he's definitely was one of our guys that tried feeding biochar in the very beginning. And I love keeping up with what Del has going on, because you just know it's going to be exciting. So I know one of the last things that I was visiting with those guys about is we have a producer, and I hope it's okay if I go off on a little bit of this stuff, but we have a producer up in Billings, Montana that feeds worm castings to his cattle. So if you really want a progressive idea.
Go on. I'm listening.
Well, and so I was talking to Del a couple months ago about this, and he starts asking me about feeding worm castings. So it sounds like that's kind of maybe one of the other new things that some of these progressive guys are really looking at is feeding worm castings and the biology in the worm castings and what that can do. My first thought was to take worm casting tea and add it to the biochar. And then feed the biochar, but it's one of those ideas that I had never considered, feeding worm castings to an animal, but I guess there are people doing it with success.
Is worm casting, or are worm castings easy to harvest? I don't know.
They
don't know much about worms.
It's kind of like a composting operation. They typically run it through like a tumbler.
Okay.
so that they separate out any of the.
It separates out easy then? Okay, so like a screening or whatever.
Yeah, they screen it essentially. But yeah, that was kind of my first thought too, because sometimes it kind of depends what you're feeding the worms as well. If you're feeding the worms stuff that has, rocks and stuff in it, then it wouldn't work because you wouldn't want your livestock eating anything.
Hardware disease, right?
Yeah. But that's kind of where I was thinking, well, if you just added the compost tea to the biochar, then you don't have any issues. But again, I think we're finding out that this whole biology thing is just more important than we ever realized, and that there's a lot of different ways to go about, getting the benefits to the animal, to the soil, to the dung beetles, whatever, kind of whatever your focus is.
Worm castings, feeding worm castings to cows. That one's totally new. Learn something new every day. Never stop learning.
Yeah, well, who knows? In 5 years, it might be the latest craze. But I was trying to think of other guys that I've kind of worked with over the years that helped kind of get me into this. I think outside of the ag world, some of the folks that like the Nebraska Forest Service have been really helpful as kind of, pushing me into this. But the regenerative ag world is definitely a neat place. I love getting on Facebook and looking through the posts, what everybody's got going on, and, kind of like your feeding biochar and seed project, or seeing what kind of crimper somebody's trying out on their cover crop, or it's just neat seeing what everybody's trying.
I think we just have to keep pushing the envelope and being citizen and producer scientists and try it. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? We got to try things, because what we've been doing hasn't necessarily been working.
No, I think it worked good enough to get by for a while, and we're figuring out that it wasn't a long-term solution, and that it's not doing us favors as far as our soil health and our body's health and a lot of the other things that are going on there. But I think it's also I'm looking forward to trying to help farmers and ranchers to just win, because it seems like every time you turn around, the meat packing plants are sticking it to the farmer and rancher, or something else has gone on, and it just doesn't seem to work out, and it's frustrating to watch, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I know it'll be 3 weeks, like about 3 weeks before this airs. Just a few minutes before we got on this interview, I came across that the Packers averaged $1,076 per head profit today. Like, that's terrible. I hope by the time this comes out, things are better. But
so there's probably some rich people in South America somewhere, I guess, huh?
Oh, yeah.
So,
but we're really lucky here. We actually have a meat packing plant that just went in, a USDA packing plant in the last year, just about 2 miles from me. And,
really?
Really nice. 307 Meats, the first USDA facility in Wyoming. That we're really pushing. Wyoming's pushing hard right now to try to get some other options, because these guys don't have any options. They have to truck it to Greeley. So we're literally trucking out of state just to process.
Love to hear it. Yep.
Losing value the whole way. So let's just put Rowdy in charge. Rowdy, I'm going to give you a magic lamp with a genie, and he is going to give you one wish. You can do with that wish whatever you want. You can be in charge of whatever you want. Make one big sweeping decision. What are you going to do?
I'm going to have an army of farms and ranches across the United States that are all producing biochar on their farms and utilizing waste streams, improving their soil health, growing food, and figuring out how to make these guys some money on the carbon credits that they're generating through their biochar production. That would truthfully be my dream. My big deal is to make a difference. So that's we kind of got into that on the last video that I did for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. But I mean, I'm here to leave a legacy, not to try to generate a fortune and buy a mega yacht or anything like that.
Can we do both? Just kidding.
I mean, I can see the appeal of a mega yacht. Don't get me wrong, but then I can also see the tremendous energy and fuel bill behind it, and kind of
maintenance.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe if somebody else is paying for that, I'd go enjoy it once in a while. So
there you go. But no, I think that would be my dream. I really like working with farmers and ranchers. It's been funny. We got accepted into what's called the G-Beta Business Accelerator Program, and we've had to kind of go round and round and looking at different aspects of High Plains Biochar. And one of the things that we've really come back to is that I just really like working with farmers and ranchers, and that's kind of one of the things that I'm good at. And so that's that's really my focus through all this, is to try to do that even more.
Is that, would you say that motivates you to get out of bed in the morning, or is it something else?
No, absolutely. I get excited about agriculture. Like I'm crazy. My little research farm here, I only have just over an acre, but I get after it. We grow all kinds of corn up here at 7,000 feet in elevation. And so I like understanding, kind of what the producers are up against. And I like kind of my, being my little mini farm here to kind of understand a little bit of that, just a small fraction of what you guys are actually dealing with in the real world.
So do you have a list of amazing hacks and cheat codes?
Unfortunately, I do not.
Up, down, left, right. I don't know. I can't do it anymore. So is there anything you wish you would have known on day one?
I guess, I think from when I started out with High Plains Biochar, I didn't quite understand, I guess, the whole regenerative agriculture world. I was more focused on just the wood utilization side. So I think that's probably something from the beginning. I wish I kind of understood that when I got started. Then I think I could have put together the pieces of the puzzle a little bit sooner than I have now. Because it's taken me a while. I would say I've just been more kind of like treading water the last couple of years, just kind of waiting to see what was happening with the industry and kind of the direction things were going. And now I finally feel like I know what I need to do here as far as, creating, this equipment for these guys to start creating their own biochar. But there are, some other equipment options out there. It's just pretty limited. And that's, when I started looking to produce biochar, that's what I ran into, was that there just isn't a lot of options.
So what would be some advice you'd have for somebody wanting to get started either building a biochar business or making biochar for their own use on the farm?
That's a great question. If we're looking to start producing your own biochar and selling it, I think that getting involved, with the local regenerative agriculture community is going to be your number one priority. Start attending those meetings, get hooked up with guys like you and Josh and Dell and a lot of these other guys that are doing innovative things. And so that way you can kind of expose yourself to what they're trying and kind of target those people, because you're really trying to find the early adopters, the people that are willing to try something new when no one else will, and trying to kind of seek out those people. But, I would also try to focus on anybody that also has an interest in the game. So look at foresters. If they have a focus on wood utilization, they may be able to help you. Then get into like the, your local farmers market side of things. Maybe some of those are producers you can work with. So you're going to try to find, those markets for your biochar. If you're going to, say you're a sawmill out in the middle of Nebraska and you're trying to find markets for your biochar, that would be my focus, is trying to find local uses for it as close as possible. Now the farmer, he doesn't have to do that so much because he's going to utilize the biochar on site. So I think for them, it's a little simpler of an operation. And that's kind of why I think that the co-op is going to work so well, just because you're utilizing the biochar on site, you're utilizing the waste that's on site. There's no transportation. So when you start seeing, what I'm kind of seeing in the carbon credit world is that they're under a lot of scrutiny to really justify what they're actually removing from the atmosphere. And I think that farmers are going to be able to make the best case you could ever imagine for why their carbon credits are the best, because the material wasn't hauled in. The material was already readily available. It wasn't something that they've had to go cut down and truck to town, and they're using it on site. So again, there's no transportation. So I think that as we start seeing more scrutiny on the carbon credits, that these carbon credits that are produced on farm are going to very quickly rise their way to the top of that list as like the best of the best. So I think that would be, kind of my other focus on the farm side. They're going to use it in their soil, feed it to their animals, but try to kind of figure out that last income, figure out how you can make carbon credits for what you're doing with your land as well, not just biochar.
The concern would be, people trying to game the system or adulterating or, there's always going to be the bad actors that are going to try to come in and ruin it for everybody else.
Yeah, what we see in Europe is there's just a whole set of checks and balances especially with the biochar producers, where if they're getting the credit for producing the biochar, it's not available for that. That was already assumed that biochar was applied at that point. And I think that's kind of the neat thing, is where if you're making the biochar, you can get the credit directly. So it's a little different model than, working with like Indigo Ag and trying to get them to pay you for something that you're doing on your farm, or another one of these companies that are doing carbon credits now.
So that would be a direct capture using the European model for the maker of the biochar versus the person sequestering the carbon.
That's exactly right. So when you buy a carbon credit from a European biochar, from a manufacturer that has gone through the EBC or the European biochar, I forget exactly what it is. There's only one company in the United States doing that now, and that's Pacific Biochar. But you can go on like the Carbon Future website, and you can go click on that, and they'll have 6 or 8 different biochar manufacturers, and you can go on there and click on which one you want, and it'll tell the story about their biochar, how stable it is, and so that's kind of what they do. They go through a full audit for their supply chain. How far is your material trucked in? Where did that material come from? How far is it being trucked from there? So they really look at the whole carbon footprint.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that we'll see a similar thing done here. But there definitely are. It's funny. There's a lot of people that have asked me about that. Can I get it for making it and then turn around and then get it again for applying it? And I mean, maybe there would be a way to go about that, but it would also probably require forgery or lying on documentation. And, it's kind of like organic farming. At some point we do have to trust what people are
only as good as the label.
That's exactly. Well, it's just, guys, does he really not put anything on his field? We don't really know that. We have to trust what he's writing, and we have to believe that he's going to be truthful with us, because on Tuesday night, he could have driven down there with some chemicals and dumped it, and none of us would know any different.
Truth in advertising, transparency, traceability, kind of a couple reoccurring themes.
Yeah, it's something we kind of struggle with here in the United States.
Yeah.
Buy that South American beef that says USA on the front.
Let's not even get started on that. I'm trying to plan another Mike Calicrate episode and get Greg Gunthorpe involved too, and just get those two together and just wind them up and let them go.
Maybe they can talk about the Pause Act too. That'd be great.
Yeah. Did you get any? Did Mike talk about biochar at all? Because I know he's kind of a biochar enthusiast of sorts.
No, we actually didn't get into that. That was back on episode 4, and man, we talked about we talked about the packers, the collusion, and how that was bad for the market. What else did we get into?
Basically breaking up, decentralizing the packing plants, and doing like a mobile slaughter unit. And then he also talked about composting the offal, and I thought that was just so interesting.
And
he's got so many different things, from the food side with his bone broth, and the other the cow tipping or the mobile cow processing and everything. But he also he got into making biochar. I know they were making bone biochar out there. He had kind of this
bone char
kiln.
Yeah, he did mention bone char.
So yeah, that bone char is kind of another interesting one, because it's got a lot of calcium, a lot of phosphorus. It doesn't have the carbon in it, so it's really an interesting product.
Well, maybe we'll have to get Mike back on. I don't know, for a couple of them.
Oh yeah, but you never know if another good one might be the guys that run the 307 meat packing plant over here. They might be able to give you some really neat insight into to what it's like starting your own meat packing business.
Well, yeah, CK, we'll definitely want to talk to some meat packers, processors that have experienced the startup in the last 18 months. And
that's exactly what these guys just did. They opened last summer.
CK is going to be their best friend. I want to do it in Idaho. So my husband's from Idaho. Will hopefully be moving there in a couple of months. And eventually I want to do that there, because I don't want to go through the whole COVID thing again in their hometown. So
I got you.
Yeah.
Very cool. So now, Brian, I was trying to remember, you're kind of over in the Wichita area. Is that correct?
Not technically in the Wichita metro area. It's about 100 miles away.
I got you.
So I have to go there tomorrow for several doctor's appointments, and it's 4 hours for doctor's appointments. It's just
joy.
A lot of miles.
That's neat country.
But I think about it, and
I'm probably not as bad off as some people that live in further out in the weeds, West Texas and New Mexico, and there's parts of Montana that are farther away from medical care than I am. So I'm not going to complain too terribly much.
Yeah, I did a little project on one of Ted Turner's buffalo ranches up in western Nebraska, and the folks that ran that, it's a 2.5-hour trip to Walmart one way.
Wow.
And so it's like just going to the store. It's a once a month affair, but they load up, and it's like an all day affair just to go grab groceries. So it's kind of interesting how isolated some of those places still are these days.
At Walmart's 45 minutes. There's a grocery store about a half hour away, about 20-25.
Nice. So I actually went to school over there. I went to school south of you. I went in Stillwater. I went to Oklahoma State.
Okay. Yeah.
So I did a little growing up down in that area. So what's I have more of a feel for kind of what's going on in Colorado and in western Nebraska. Are you seeing a lot of biochar interest kind of down in your neck of the woods?
Oh, I mean, I'd say people are, they're talking about it a little more. They're asking a few more questions. Yeah, I mean, people are coming up on their interest. They're getting more interested in it and how to make it and where to get it and what it does.
I know that, over east of you guys there, in Missouri, there's a couple of larger manufacturers, Wakefield Biochar and TerraChar over there. And so I know, I've kind of watched them. And I know, in Lawrence, they've been doing some biochar work over in Lawrence, Kansas there for quite a few years. And so it seems like it's slowly but surely growing. But I think it's a little different for you guys where it's not so much a pine utilization to avoid forest fires type situation.
It's should be more of a eastern red cedar tree removal to prevent loss of grassland biome. Hopefully one day I'll get my friend Drac Twidwell on to talk about grassland conversion and eastern red canopy cover.
So how does that typically work now? Are they going in and they just cut these cedars down, pile them up and burn them? Or are you guys trying to burn them while they're still really little?
Okay, so it really depends on kind of how old the infestation is, how thick it is, and some land management. I mean, ideally, you wouldn't let the invasive trees get more than 4 or 5 feet tall, and then you only need about a foot of grass to get those on fire. Then to get your larger trees to go, you need to build what's called ladder fuel. So you can't just have a 40-foot tall cedar tree with 2-foot tall grass in the bottom of it and expect that tree to light up. So you need to go maybe clear some of the smaller trees and then stuff them under the big ones or stuff them down in the canyons so you can get the heat load in there to burn down the bigger trees. Of course, there's other ways to take trees and make them go away, like in situ mulching process. Like you take a mulching tractor or an excavator with a mulcher head on it, and you just shred the tree right there and leave all the biomass in place. Then you don't have the energy involved in moving it, and you're not necessarily releasing carbon into the atmosphere, and the ground doesn't experience a thermal event.
I got you. Yeah, but those are expensive as heck to run as well.
Yeah,
imagine, right.
But then on the other side, so if we wanted to just simply go cut those trees down and then move them and put them through some kind of shredding process to put them in a biochar reactor, that's still an energy investment and a time investment.
No, absolutely. What there may, depending on how close you are to communities, another good source that people will find is a lot of your tree services are actively trying to find places to get rid of their wood chips. And that can be another good source, not just for making biochar, but just for another source of organic material. So I don't know how that works. Over here, they have what's called Chip Drop, and you can sign up on their app and they will come and dump chips at your place. But I know that's definitely another source, but more for urban type wood waste.
Chip Drop app. I'll have to make sure I put that in the show notes. Because every couple of years, the Highline contractors, the right-of-way clearers, they come by, and inevitably they come into the yard and be like, "Hey, you got a place where we can dump a truckload of mulch?" And be like, "Yeah, sure. How many you want to dump? I'll take all of them. And if you mulch the pile of brush that's standing right next to my mulch pile, that'd be great." So every couple of years we get a couple of truckloads of mulch. They have yet to pick up any of my branches and chip them and add them to my pile, but that's okay. We just section that for bonfire wood or whatever.
Yeah, I'm curious. One of these days, I'll have to try it. If I get a hold of some cedars to try doing just an open burn with cedars and see how they do making biochar. I've never tried that. I've mostly done pine and other types.
Oh, the funny thing about cedar is the very high oil content in the needles. I mean, you've seen what a pine tree crown fire looks like, or fir trees when they crown fire out. You've got 40-foot tall tree that's throwing 100 foot of flame in the air. Cedars do that too, and it's I might think that their oil is a little bit more volatile than some of the pine oils.
That would make sense because they're all needle, that's for sure. I mean, you've got the trunk, but aside from that, there's just a lot of needle in that material for sure.
I would almost wonder if there was a possibility to take, the cedar wood and separate the oil out and use that oil for something, and then still have the wood that could be processed into biochar.
Yeah, that would definitely be an interesting one if cedar oil had a market for it, for sure.
If we only knew any really smart engineering type people.
That's interesting that's kind of your guys' main challenge. So it sounds like figuring out a way to turn your invasive cedars into biochar in a very simple and efficient way would be really, really useful. So I'm kind of thinking, for that, in terms of simplicity, that almost more like open burns or even like one of those air curtain burners might be the simplest way to go about that.
Or something that looks like, a method or a system to go out and dig a pit, fill it up, and then, wait till it gets to a certain temperature and be able to quench it, and have some guidelines on what what sort of equipment you need to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, and in fact, there's an NRCS. Gosh, I haven't thought about this in a while, so make sure I explain this correctly. But there is an NRCS program for doing that with your wood waste. I'll have to look it up, but I haven't played with that in a while. But there is a program where guys can get paid if you're part of the CSP program.
Oh.
So if you're part of the CSP program through there, you can actually get paid to convert some of that material. You can get a cost share, I guess, to convert it. Mm-hmm. But they use the Nebraska Forest Service kind of set the guidelines, and I'm assuming the Kansas Forest Service has done the exact same thing and copied them because they work hand in hand. But that may be another option for you guys if you're looking to make some biochar with some wood waste that you've got on site. There are some cost shares available, and they'll let you use, if you're familiar with them, those Oregon kilns. Where it's kind of like a pyramid, just an open kiln that you just kind of continue to stack material on top of.
I have to check those designs out. If you get a chance, please send me that link, and I'll make sure it gets into the show notes page.
Yeah, I will absolutely. Yeah, there it is. Biochar production from wood waste. So yes, it's part of the NRCS CSP. So I will absolutely make sure that I get that over to you guys.
So, kind of wrapping up our time today, I want to know what's one of the biggest challenges that you faced on this path of regenerative agriculture and biochar, and what has it taught you?
That's easy. Closed-minded people. I run into that a lot. Just people that are used to doing it the old way and they don't really want to hear about a new way. So that is by far and away the biggest challenge that I've faced when it comes to biochar, is just people that aren't open to new ideas and new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. We compound that here in Wyoming because we're a coal state and we're an energy state.
That's right. Yeah.
And so any type of green business is just kind of shunned, and you need to go to Colorado and go hang out in Boulder, go play with your windmills, whatever you want to do, that kind of mentality. And so that's what we really, that's been by far the biggest challenge in this, is just that, global warming doesn't exist, and, that wood utilization isn't a problem, and we just need to use coal. And believe it or not, the University of Wyoming, like, their big focus right now is on turning coal into biochar. So they're convinced that they're going to pyrolyze coal and find a new market for the coal that they want to sell, and that farmers are going to apply pyrolyzed coal to their fields. And it's just mind-boggling to think that somebody who was intelligent thought that was a good idea and that would work.
It's weird because they're not willing to do what you're doing, but they're willing to do kind of what you're doing, but with what the materials are already using.
Yeah,
so
it's almost flattering, because it's like, well, you are acknowledging something by this, but I don't think that they realize what the regenerative
missing the mark
would say to that. Like, you want us to dig up coal, pyrolyze it, truck it down to the Midwest, and then apply it to fields. This just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense with the direction that we're going. So I think that's been just one of the challenges, is just kind of that old way of thinking and not being willing to try new things and kind of shift our focus. I think we need to, as far as our Western forests go, we need to really rethink what we're doing. Right now in this country, we have lumber prices are through the roof. It's $60 for a piece of plywood. And we literally just closed down a sawmill in the Black Hills last month because they couldn't get enough wood from the U.S. Forest Service. And
so it is a supply thing, and it's not if they're fixing the price.
No, it's really funny how a lot of our wood just comes out of Canada. They have a better system in place for doing this, and what we do is we let our forests burn. And bring in the cavalry, airplanes, helicopters. We had 1,000 people over here fighting a fire last summer, just in Laramie. I think they spent around $20 million fighting a little fire to save one neighborhood up in the national forest. And it's mind-boggling how we manage our forest. And hopefully we can come up with a better way, utilize more of that, make some actual lumber, put Americans to work, American manufacturing, stop relying on Canada for things, cut the cost of building a house, cut the cost of building a fence, and utilize that wood so it doesn't get wasted. And the list goes on and on. We just need to rethink how we're doing some of this.
I'm just sitting here trying not to turn this into a libertarian propaganda podcast and say government is evil. They've ruined everything. Maybe I'll start that next year.
I understand. We'll try to keep it on biochar, but
you guys want to talk about the fuel shortages now? Next, I'm kidding.
Oh, will that even be current events in 3 weeks, or will there be something even weirder?
I'm just seeing all these videos of people with their Tupperware filling up it with gasoline. I'm like, okay.
CK, I almost feel like you and I just need to get on Wednesday night, do a current events, and release it Thursday morning, just because things are just so weird, so
you just think
fast.
It can't get worse. It does. And then I always text Brian. I'm like, is this for real? Like, is this real life? And he's like, yes, this is real life, CK.
It's like Saturday Night Live does the weekend update. You guys could do the weekday update.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might be a challenge to kind of keep that one upbeat sometimes.
Oh yeah, I completely understand.
So, Rowdy, it's your turn. Is there anything you'd like to know from me or CK that we haven't already covered?
No, I'm just curious what you guys are seeing. I mean, aside from biochar, just what else is interesting going on in Kansas these days? I'm a little separated from that world right now in Wyoming, so I don't necessarily get to, understand what you guys have going on. I know everybody's focused on beef prices and that sort of thing. And
Oh yeah, everybody's focused on beef prices and the disparity between fats and boxed beef right now, which was $1,076 average profit per head for the Packers today. Eat beef.
JBS.
Yeah, JBS, Tyson, National, Marfrig, all those nice foreign entities that are strip mining our wealth and stealing our communities and robbing our farmers blind. But I wonder how many
You guys are doing a packing plant, though, in your neighborhood, right?
Yes.
We are.
Slaughterhouse, right?
Yeah, we got permitted here in Medicine Lodge a couple weeks ago. The city council approved a permit for a processing plant in the industrial park. I kind of know the guy that's behind it, but he's being fairly tight-lipped for now. So,
that's probably what this one that just went in here in Laramie. I think they're only set up to process maybe I want to say 40 a week. I think is their limit.
Okay, but here's the fun part, though. We're talking about 40 a week. That's a lot of pounds of beef. How much beef does the community of Laramie consume in a year versus how much is that plant going to produce?
That's a good question. This plant, I think, it's not even so much tied to the Laramie community. A lot of these are just ranchers in Wyoming that are processing here so they can resell it back in Torrington, back in Casper, back in Sheridan, just because there is no USDA facility up there so that they can resell it. Also for the guys that are marketing out of state, if you're selling it down into the Fort Collins market or something like that. So it's kind of a unique situation where there is some local buying of that meat there, but a lot of it is still custom processing for other people that are doing, different things with it where it's not being sold right here in Laramie.
Mm-hmm.
But
I did a rough calculation. If we do 40 head a week, and let's just say they weigh 1,200 pounds, they're light steers, and their yield rate is 65%, which I know is also very conservative. Over 1.6 million pounds of beef a year.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Now, divide that by 75, because it's 75 pounds a person a year, according to the USDA, beef consumption.
Over 20,000, so 21,000.
That's a good sized plant. That's a good sized community plant. And honestly, those are the plants that we should have everywhere. I mean, you shouldn't just have one of those in Laramie. You should have 5 of them in Laramie.
No, I think
there should be one
right.
in Chadron, Nebraska. I mean, if your community is 10,000 people, you should have a packing plant that size so everybody in the community is benefiting from it. And then you're taking that meat and sending it to Chicago or New York or wherever, and it's branded from your region and possibly even back to ranch of origin.
Yeah, that's I'm sure you've kept up with a little bit, but Wyoming is trying to be the innovator in blockchain, and part of that is beef chain.
That was 2 episodes ago, which, as we record this, is still a week in the future.
I gotcha. Yeah, it's really fascinating kind of learning about that. I was actually if you want to hear about a really new one that came up, is that there's a company in Colorado called cow tipping. And they're trying to get it set up to where people can tip the rancher when they're having dinner, so they can give the guy a tip from their dining room table for the beef that he's provided the family. So you're cow tipping.
I like it.
I did too.
Like
I thought
Sign up
I was
for it,
like
Brian.
thinking about the concept. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I don't know if it'll work out, but there's a lot of interesting ideas being thrown around right now.
The idea that I'd like to stress is these neat concepts of traceability only work with transparency. That's the only way that we're really gonna end up with a food system that connects producers to consumers, is if we have top to bottom transparency of not only what's in the food, but what has been done to the food.
No, I completely agree. There's a company here called Wyoming Gourmet Beef, and they sell at some of the Walmarts. They sell a jerky product, but they actually have the name of the ranch on the back of the package. So you can even look there, and some of them will be different depending on when they were processing, but it's kind of cool knowing exactly what town, what ranch it was. But if you could trace it back down to the animal when it was born, what chemicals it had added to it, then you really have something interesting. The one challenge that I've run into, we're looking at doing blockchain to confirm the biochar carbon credits. And one of the things that we've run into is it's extremely carbon intensive. So that's kind of one of the challenges. I know in Europe, they're looking at kind of some of the simpler blockchains for doing that kind of verification because of a much lower carbon footprint. But it was something else that I hadn't ever really considered. But
apparently this week, everybody seemed to figure out that using electricity to manufacture Bitcoin isn't really that great of a use of energy.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you there. It makes you wonder why all the the Bitcoin miners all aren't located in Minneapolis or something. So at least most of the year they can utilize all the heat that their computer systems are generating, doing all that work. But where most places, hell, they're running an air conditioner to cool it back off, just making it even worse.
Yeah, or they co-locate somewhere where, at nighttime we can buy power for 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Like, oh, well, that's great. It's still, yeah, I just don't get Bitcoin, but that's probably a totally other rabbit trail.
No, that was pretty fun. I don't know if you watched Saturday Night Live this last weekend, but
the Dogecoin, right?
Dogecoin, it was hilarious, yeah. And they kept just saying, "So, what is Dogecoin?" Just over and over because nobody understands what the hell it is. I think
it as far as I understand, it was a joke. It was originally started
he made
as
it tank, right? He made the market tank, and then he had to go reinvest in it to make it a valid thing again. Is what I read.
Well, last week, I mean, granted, we're releasing this in 3 weeks, but last week he was talking about, or Tesla.
The joke.
No, Tesla was taking payments.
They're going to accept it.
For Tesla's in Bitcoin. Today, he went backwards on that. And I saw it on Twitter, and there was this whole thread where he was posting graphs about the CO2 emissions of Bitcoin and how much electricity it used.
So that's why he retracted what he said?
Yeah.
Because of that reason?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the fallout in the next few weeks between cryptocurrency and the energy use of it and the carbon responsibility of that's going to get weird fast.
It is. It definitely is. It's funny how every industry is really facing that. I know that Colorado here recently, you're starting to see a lot of the articles about the cannabis industry. And one of the interesting ones that for every ounce of pot grown in Colorado, they use the equivalent of 17 gallons of gas with energy. And it's appalling to think that, but that's another one of those industries where I think we're going to see a lot of scrutiny and start seeing some focus on reducing some of that carbon footprint.
So I got to share this. Several years ago, I visited a commercial grow in Colorado, and it was all indoors. Hydroponic. I mean, they had their nutrients. They're all organic nutrients. And it was this fish byproduct and this thing and this thing and this thing. And I was noticing their lights. I had a lot of questions about their lights. And the tour guide apparently didn't want to answer these questions because about halfway through, an older lady joined the tour and started answering all of my questions. And at the end of the tour, she took me aside. And I was like, I'm the CEO of this company, and nobody's ever asked these questions before. And I kind of boiled it down to her. I said, how much power do you use? What's your kilowatt hour? And she told me how much electricity they use for a month. And I said, now what would it take to generate all your electricity from solar power? And she said, we could not afford the land. We looked at it, but we can't afford the land.
That's the truth of it. That's the truth of it.
Well, and it's also people understand energy has to come from somewhere, and it's not as simple as just getting rid of oil and gas or getting rid of coal or wherever else we're generating their energy.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think as far as the cannabis industry goes, I suspect that within a year or two that we're going to start seeing some of the really progressive growers that are growing, in greenhouses using natural light, maybe using biomass for their heat. They're going to start marketing their cannabis as carbon neutral cannabis, carbon negative cannabis.
Well, so I see it on my kombucha and everything else. So of course it's going to happen to cannabis.
Absolutely. So I think that's the thing is that as everybody's under more scrutiny, we're going to start seeing, more people like focusing on kind of these other energy uses. And I think that's one of the neat ways that biochar can kind of get involved with some of these industries, heating greenhouses, or if you're in the sawmill industry, you can kiln dry lumber, especially where you guys are. Here you can kiln dry lumber just by setting it outside for a couple months. Down where you guys actually get what's called rain, you need a little bit of heat and some different things to actually dry out. So I think there's certainly plenty of opportunities. One of the other big ones that I'm really focusing on as someday I want to see biomass used to make cement. Cement emits 5% of all global emissions, and they use just massive amounts of energy. And if we could figure out a way to utilize biomass for that, we could really.
I mean, it's just a chemical reaction if you think about it, right? The whole process.
It is. They just get it red hot. I mean, it's a rotary kiln, and they get things 2,500 degrees in there. But that's another one of those that I would like to see. Co-location of a biomass processing facility and cement production, and start figuring out how we can combine some of these really energy intensive processes in a more efficient way.
Well, that'll make the roads last longer, and then that'll put all the road construction companies out of business.
Yeah, that's right. We wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want that. Just like we can't get people healthy because we've got to keep the fast food companies, the pharmaceuticals, the healthcare industry. We've got to keep everybody in business instead of focusing on our own health.
Just distill everybody down to a set of numbers that you can apply, that you can look at a diagnostic chart and apply a treatment. And apply a treatment for. Not interested in curative at all. It's all treatment. There's no money in cures. Lots of money in treatment.
And I think that's why it's a challenge to see, on the agriculture side, just research for some things that aren't necessarily, there's not a way to make a huge profit for a company. There's no way to make billions of dollars in profit on dung beetles, so nobody really cares. But they're really important, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be focusing on them.
I've said it for a long time. You can't buy a box of soil health at the farm store, and that's why nobody talks about it.
It's very true. Well, here's a good one for you. So I keep waiting around. What have you ever heard of anybody who's going to start a dung beetle ranch?
Well,
Thought about it.
I mean, not specifically.
Like growing dung beetles, right?
Raising dung beetles, like raising them. I've talked with Goosey Hayes about this. I think there's a real business opportunity for a young entrepreneurial ag guy, because there are so many people that want to buy dung beetles to establish populations. And
you can do that with ladybugs and everything else, right? Because they're predator bugs, and they do that for greenhouses, right? If they have like an infestation. I bet. Do you know? Is it easy to grow dung beetles? Have you looked into it at all?
Raising dung beetles, yeah, I'm pretty. We've looked into this. I have another business that makes skull hangers, and they use flesh-eating beetles for their skulls. So I have a pretty good understanding of what it looks like captive flesh-eating beetle breeding. And you look in Australia, there's people that sell them, especially the tunnelers. They're worth like $1 a piece. And I think there's more money raising dung beetles than there is in raising cattle in many ways.
Brian's gonna start raising dung beetles.
I'm thinking.
No, I mean, I've talked about this with many people. There's an opportunity there. People try to buy them on Dung Beetle Exchange in the United States all the time, and there's nobody selling dung beetles. And if you had them down to a few different breeds and could send them a box like green cover seed with a queen and 1,000 beetles in a box, and they could just turn them loose on their property, I think that you'd have a really neat business opportunity there.
Well, we're an hour and a half in, so this will be a test if anybody's paying attention, to see if anybody starts a dung beetle ranch in the next 6 months.
There you go. If they stay till the end and you get a call here in a little bit and say, hey, you want to come see my dung beetle ranch? You'll know.
You're welcome.
that they were listening. But I think it's a really neat opportunity that somebody is going to capitalize on after seeing the amount of interest and just the lack of opportunities. And if you're going to raise something, might as well be one of the only few in the country. So,
yeah, find a niche, own it, and own it early. So. Well, guys, I think that's a pretty great place to wrap up. Rowdy, it has been a ton of fun today.
Absolutely, Brian and CK. I really appreciate you guys listening to all the talk about biochar and hearing about what else is going on in your world, and occasional talking about meat packing plants and dung beetles and other important things going on these days.
Oh, we're all about chasing regenerative rabbit trails wherever they may go.
I like it.
Oh, CK, did we leave anything?
No, I think that was great, especially for me. I really didn't know a lot about biochar other than like people ask me, and then I say I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry. So thank you for enlightening me. I feel like I learned a lot. So
I certainly appreciate it. If any of your listeners want to reach out with questions after the fact, like Brian, I think mentioned, you can reach me at hpbiochar.com is the website. We've also got a Facebook page, so there's plenty of ways to reach out if you have other questions or interested in kind of what we have going on.
And I'll make sure those make their way into the show notes.
And I'm going to make sure to get the information on the NRCS upgrade or cost share for doing biochar on your property. So I'll make sure to get that over to you.
As sometimes show notes are a little painful for me to write, but I'm getting better. So with that, guys, I'm Red Hills Rancher, and I want to really, really again thank Rowdy for joining CK and myself today on this wonderful journey of regeneration and biochar and what it can all be used for. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, a private group, Ranching Reboot Paddock, and be sure to share the podcast with your friends if we've made an impact in your life or changed your paradigms in any way. So until next week, gang, Red Hills Rancher, out.